as I understood this story, the young man whose death we are commemorating here and analyzing and trying to generalize from, started his career with a fit of rage. And then we were talking about the cultural aspects of this problem. And I was noticing that the panel is composed of neurophysiology, biomechanics, mechanical engineering, and journalism. And I was wondering whether this internal system of if you beat your head against your neighbors long enough, the tau proteins begin to misfold and multiply. I was wondering whether rage is sort of spreading through the culture, and thinking about the domestic violence that also occurs as a result, or excuse me, I'm exposing my bias here, as a collateral kind of behavior that's been identified in professional athletes recently. And so I was wondering if we might not want to, in future panels, have a psychologist among the panelists. So the question is rage perpetuating itself through these micro molecular forces?
Well, I mean, one thing that I noticed in reading about Derek Boogaard, this is sort of tangential to your point, but is like you said, there's kind of a vicious cycle aspect to it where, you know, he had this role as a fighter, and that's the kind of the job he had. I mean, one thing that sticks out in John's book is he talks about, for all this that we're focusing on his head, in his life, his biggest problem was his hands. His hands were always cut. His hands were always hurt. His hands were always broken. And as a result, he got painkillers and fell into the cycle of painkiller addiction. So, you know, then at that point, is it the addiction? Is it the traumatic effects? It's everything, in my opinion. I mean, I'll let the scientists but to your point, you can see that, and one of the side effects is often irritability, which can lead to domestic violence down the road. And I don't know if you have other.
Did you notice when I heard the word molecular, I turned this way and said, I hope somebody else is going to answer this question. So I'm curious myself to hear what you guys have to say about that.
I don't know if I could speak to the molecular aspect of that, but there is a lot of violence in our society that's unrelated to known head trauma. And it's I mean, your metaphor of violence spreading, I think, was a very lovely one, and concerning probably to everyone in the room.
Hi, so I'd like to re-ask the question that you guys get asked millions of times about how safe are sports for kids. And thinking about it, maybe a lot of us parents aren't so concerned, you know, with our young kids getting concussed. And I know you guys spoke about the challenges of diagnosing concussions, but it seems like, and this question is maybe directed at David, it seems like with biosensors, there's the opportunity to measure repetitive actions in sports and repetitive potential traumas, such as heading the ball in soccer and tackles in football, punches in boxing, and come up with a relative measurement for the forces of those different potential traumas. And I was wondering if your research speaks to, the relative relationship between different sports and whether you're measuring that.
Yeah. You know, there are already actually products out on the market. In fact, the biggest splash that some of you may have heard of, Reebok partnered with a company in Boston, MC10, and they released this last fall a skull cap they call the Reebok Check Light. And there's a variety of products like this. This one's specifically tailored to football, but they have there's other products like a little skin patch you can wear behind your ear for soccer heading. And these are what they call green light, red light systems. And the idea is if you get a green light, you're okay. Yellow light, well, you might want to check this kid out. A red light, oh, that's a problem, get him off the field. I like that idea. That's kind of what we ultimately need, and I think what you and I would want as parents. But truly, our studies are in the very early stages, and we do not have data that would support any of the decision boundaries for these light colors. In fact, I can tell you that the light colors are based on some of this old research from the 60s and 70s where they were taking cadaver heads and dropping them from elevator shafts and finding out when the skull would fracture. That's a simple thing to look at. You just do an x-ray and you see if there was a skull fracture or not. But with the inertial brain trauma, we don't know. And in fact, my lab has been taking a close look at these sensors and just simple question, how accurate do they measure the skull motion? That's what they're trying to do. And the answer is many of them do not do a good job. So I would caution people in purchasing these things and expecting it to really tell you about the brain health of your child at this point. But that's not to say it's not possible. It's just we're not there yet.
Hi. Two quick questions, and I came a little bit late, so this first question might be just a clarification. To my understanding, the football lawsuit that they're filing against the NFL was because these players felt like they were lied to, and I just wanted to know from the NHL standpoint why they were filing that lawsuit against the NHL. And then my second question, not related to that specifically, but as to what's being done right now, I know there's not much. I know we're doing a lot of testing and different measures of trying to find this tau protein and stuff like that. But for the guys that are struggling right now, I know there's been some studies on the nutritional side, and I don't know how credible they are, but studies that suggest that antioxidants, polyphenols, that kind of deal. There's been a few studies from Stanford. Dr. Jerome Yesavage did some studies on phosphatidylserine with cognitive decline. And I was wondering what you were thinking from that standpoint as an immediate measure for helping athletes right now.
All right, so first question about the lawsuits. You're right, the NFL faced a lawsuit, actually a class action lawsuit. I think 4,500 former players joined it, and they settled it about a year ago for $800 million, although it keeps kind of getting surfacing back up because people have issues with the settlement. The NHL is, as I said, kind of following that same arc. The lawsuit is very, very similar, partly because the issues that they have are similar, but also because the lawyers who are representing the NHL are some of the same lawyers that went after the NFL. And that is, yeah, you guys hid things from us. We didn't know the dangers of this. The Boogaards are not involved in that lawsuit. They actually have a separate lawsuit against the NHL for wrongful death that has more to do with the care he received or perhaps did not receive from team doctors and from the substance abuse program. But that concussion lawsuit really has to do with, we never knew what concussions were. You guys said that you guys were on this 20 years ago, but no one ever really told us. I mean, Derek didn't know what a concussion was. You would think somebody who's getting his face hit on a regular basis would actually have some idea what a concussion was. So it's a very similar kind of deal.
Thank you.
Just one thing to comment on the lawsuit. Part of the issue that they've been complaining about with the NFL in terms of the deception is the NFL, when they were coming under fire, the last 10 or 15 years about the concussion problem, they did start putting some money into research, and in fact, they published this infamous series of papers in, I think it was neurosurgery, where they studied, NFL concussions, and at least the way the media portrays this is that they were trying to really mask how big of a problem it is. I don't really see it that way myself. I don't know what their motives were. I mean, they may have, of course they didn't want this to be a problem, but I'm not sure they were really trying to hide it, at least in this set of journal papers. So, whether, I can imagine it'd be hard for these NHL players to make the same criticism in terms of trying to deceive them actively because they weren't engaged in that part of the process.
The NHL, though, did say that it undertook a 6-year study, I think from like 96 to 2002 on concussions, and then it took more than 10 years before anybody ever saw it. And so I think part of them, in a similar vein with the NFL, it's like, wait, you guys say you're doing this, and they kept saying, yeah, you'll get it, you'll see it eventually. And nobody ever really saw it. And so there was some sort of, again, sort of a carrot hanging out there for some of these people thinking that we're going to get some answers, and that the answers never came. Maybe because they didn't want you to know the answers.
And then you had a question about supplements.
Yeah.
I don't think there are any good data for or against.
You said there's no good data for them?
I don't think there are any empirical studies out there that convincingly support their use, and nothing out there that I know of that suggests that they're bad for you. So,
Thank you.
On a lighter note, 2 quick questions. One, what happens to a woodpecker's brain? The second is an engineering approach. What happens if could one apply an equal and opposite acceleration, even by via rockets or jets, air jets or something like that? Yeah. Not necessarily in football, but in race car drivers and jet fighter pilots or astronauts or people or planes dropping with parachutes coming in the future and so on. Yeah. I mean, the computers are fast enough, and I would like to hear your...
So the woodpecker, there's a question. There have been a few studies out there on the woodpecker question, and I don't think it's totally agreed upon why they are immune to concussion. I mean, certainly one factor, they have much smaller brains, so the inertial loading, the force is proportional to the mass, is less. Another theory is that the biomechanics of their pecking is in a purely linear motion, so the head of the woodpecker doesn't rotate much, and the brain is kind of like the consistency of Jell-O. So, and it's floating in cerebral spinal fluid, which is essentially water. So, in fact, there's a fun little experiment to do around the holidays. If you take a little snow globe, in fact, if it's totally full, doesn't have any bubbles, and there's snow on the bottom, you can move it back and forth quite rapidly. The snow doesn't move at all, but you give this rotational twitch, the snow goes everywhere. So, minimizing shear forces. They also have this bones, hyoid bone, that is somehow part of their tongue, and that's thought to be kind of a restraining shock. There's a lot of theories, but nobody's figured that one out yet. The question about rockets to prevent, we've come up with equally crazy ideas in my lab. That specific, you're talking about a reactive system. So it would need to kind of anticipate when trauma is about to happen. And I think that's a cool idea. It's a difficult one. Some situations might lend themselves better to doing that. In fact, there's a company that we're working with in Sweden. I mentioned the bike accident, the bike trauma. They have an airbag helmet that pops and has accelerometers and it detects when you're falling. The NFL this year just put in RFID chips, so all the players are wearing RFID, so they know where they are on the field and how fast they're moving. That technology is probably not good enough, and I'm not sure you want things popping out or rockets firing. You're right; it might not be ready for NFL, or maybe something coming up like that. So I think that's mechanically, I imagine you could get something like that to work. It's when you're talking about safety in your brain, I mean that's your most precious organ. It's got to work. It's got to be fail safe. Otherwise you're going to get sued. So I think that's one of the challenges, making sure that a smart system like that would really perform properly when the time comes.
Thank you.
That was the best answer of the day, I think. We know we're at a science conference.
If only we could teach woodpeckers to play football, we'd be in business.
Thank you.